Hello everyone, Vincent here from HDTV Test here. I'm a TV reviewer and professional calibrator. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Panasonic UB9000 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray player and its HDR Optimiser function, which in my opinion is a killer feature that delivers the best picture quality from 4K Blu-rays on most televisions. Now, I know you may not be familiar with this home screen because I've actually uploaded my own wallpaper onto this Panasonic UB9000 so that it doesn't actually display a black background which will reflect whatever is going on behind the camera. I really don't want you to see any shenanigans that is going on in my room. But before I go into the setup menu and explain to you the HDR Optimiser function, I want to take this opportunity to thank Richard Sounds for sponsoring this video. Richard Sounds is a UK AV retailer which is very famous, and my local store is Deansgate, Manchester. The team there is friendly, professional and knowledgeable. They have been very kind to sponsor many videos on this channel and also loan me some units, some televisions, some devices to be reviewed or tested or to be used on this channel. So I really appreciate their support. So if you're considering buying a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray player, even if it's not this Panasonic UB9000, I would appreciate that you can support them by calling them on 0333 900 0086. Tell them that you saw their advert on HDTV Test and they'll give you excellent price and customer service. Thanks again for your support. So I'm going to go into the user menu of the Panasonic UB9000 to explain how to set up the HDR Optimiser function. So the thing to remember is that if you go into the setup menu, go into player settings, and if you click on HDMI, go into advanced settings, what is important is that you need to set the HDR display type correctly for the tone mapping to be done correctly. So let's start from the beginning then. The reason why the HDR Optimiser function on the Panasonic UB9000, not only the Panasonic UB9000, but also the step-down UB820 and also the UB420, I believe, will have this function. Why it is so important is because this will provide a superior tone mapping to most televisions. And why is tone mapping important? Because data on 4K Blu-rays can be mastered to either 1000 nits or 4000 nits, but even on such a high-end OLED television such as this LG E8, I've measured its peak brightness to be between 700 and 750 nits. To display the data that is contained within 1000 nit or 4000 nit 4K Blu-rays within a display with a lower peak brightness, you need to perform this function called tone mapping, which will try and map the higher luminance signal to a display with lower luminance capability. But different manufacturers have implemented different tone mapping functions. Some have decided to clip away the brighter data, which will result in specular highlight detail blowout. And some have decided to roll it off, but they may have actually rolled it off too soon, causing the whole picture to become much too dark. So what Panasonic has designed on the UB9000, the UB820 and also the UB420 is this HDR Optimiser function, which attempts to perform the tone mapping in the first instance and also send out a HDR metadata that is more easily processed by the display. So the HDR metadata that the Panasonic UB9000 is going to send out will depend on what you actually select in this HDR display type here. So as you can see on this Panasonic UB9000, there are 6 options here: OLED, high luminance projector, basic luminance projector, super high luminance LCD, middle or high luminance LCD, and basic luminance LCD. I believe that on the UB820 and also the UB420, you lack these 2 options. You don't have the high luminance projector and the basic luminance projector options. I'll explain what all these corresponds to in terms of the metadata output. So if you select OLED, what the Panasonic UB9000 will do is to try and tone map any disc to a peak brightness of 1000 nits. If you select high luminance projector, it will be tone mapped to 500 nits. basic luminance projector, the player will be tone mapping the content to 350 nits. Super high luminance LCD, the content will be tone mapped to 1500 nits. Middle or high luminance LCD, which I believe is the default setting on the Panasonic UB9000, will be tone mapping to 1000 nits, just like OLED. And basic luminance LCD will be tone mapping to 500 nits. So depending on the capabilities of your display, if you happen to know its peak brightness value, then you can select one of these options. I'll select OLED because clearly this is an LGE, it is an OLED television. I'll select an OLED and then I will show you the effects of the function using this disc pen, which Panasonic happened to use when they actually did a briefing on this player last year as well. So I will wait for the disc to load. By the way, I'm actually trying to film this video using the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K. I'm just trying out new things at the moment, so just bear with me for the moment. So if I actually load up this scene here, it is a scene where there is the sun here that is actually reaching about 4000 nits, and I've purposely set up this LG OLED to disable its dynamic tone mapping function. So if I go into the user menu, you can see that I have actually disabled or turned off dynamic tone mapping on the TV to better illustrate the benefits of HDR Optimiser. So to engage the HDR Optimiser function, what you do is to press the picture settings button on the Panasonic remote control, click on optimum HDR adjustment, and then click on HDR Optimiser, and it becomes an on and off toggle. So with HDR Optimiser off, you can see that the sun is slightly blown out and there's some whitening as well. But if you actually turn it on, what you see is that it retains more of a shape of the sun, and also the surrounding clouds, they become less whitened out, they become less blown out, they retain their original color hue that is present on the disc itself. I'll show you the difference again, right? Off and on. And another cool thing about the Panasonic UB9000 is that you can actually display the HDR metadata that is present not only on the disc itself, but also what the HDR Optimiser is doing to output it. So if I press the playback info button twice, you can see that the disc is mastered to 4000 nits, right? Which means that it is likely going to be mastered on a Dolby Pulsar, although the studio has chosen not to actually put any maximum light level or maximum frame average light level, that's max CLL and max FALL, on the disc itself. It's apparently very common with some studios, I don't know why. But what happens when you actually engage the HDR Optimiser function is that after performing the tone mapping, the player will be outputting as 1000 nit in terms of the maximum light level or max CLL, and also 1000 nits as the mastering display luminance. So this means that rather than asking the display to do all the hard work, it is actually pre-processing and tone mapping the 4000 nit content to a much more manageable level for the display to be tone mapped. And if I remove this, I want to point out other superior features of the tone mapping function on the Panasonic UB9000, because if I remove this screen here, you can see that if I turn off HDR Optimiser so that the display is doing the tone mapping, and then turn it on so that the player is doing the tone mapping, obviously you retain more specular highlight detail and you retain the color fidelity at really high brightness level. But note that the average picture level doesn't actually drop, as in the shadows here and the hair there and around this area here, they don't really become darker despite the Panasonic UB9000 performing the tone mapping. So the average picture level or the overall brightness of the frame is not really affected, and the tone mapping, the HDR Optimiser function, is really only affecting the brighter parts of the picture to try and retain the fidelity, which is a fantastic function because it means that you won't suffer from crushed shadow detail. You won't suffer from darkened midtones by engaging this function. This is in contrary to, let's say, if I actually turn off the HDR Optimiser on the UB9000, if I decide to use the TV's dynamic tone mapping feature to try and retain more specular highlight detail. So if I go into cinema mode, if I go into expert controls, if I go into dynamic tone mapping, if I turn this on, you can see that even though the dynamic tone mapping function on this LG E8 has retained the specular highlight detail and preserved more of the shape of the sun and the surrounding clouds, it also darkened the whole picture, even around this area here and around this area here. Whereas with the HDR Optimiser function on the Panasonic UB9000, by engaging it, you retain the color fidelity and the specular highlight detail, but the overall brightness or the APL, average picture level, remains quite constant. This is because Panasonic has decided to follow the PQ curve as closely as possible and only apply its tone mapping on the brighter parts of the picture to try and bring, let's say, 4000 nits or 1000 nits content down to whatever output that you actually select within the setup menu. So I've tested this HDR Optimiser function on a variety of displays, ranging from projectors to low luminance LED LCD. For instance, on this low luminance LED LCD with, I think, only a peak brightness of around 300 nits. You can see in the scene from Mad Max Fury Road, if I leave the HDR Optimiser function off, the flames within the explosion will be blown out and clipped because the max CLL of the disc itself goes all the way up to 9000 nits. But if you engage the HDR Optimiser function on the player, it will sort of bring the flames back and retain more of the orange-yellow hue to give you that fiery intensity of the explosion, to give you more realism rather than just a white out explosion. And if you look at this scene from The Greatest Showman, which I have actually displayed on a projector, with projectors, HDR is always going to be a challenge, which is where the Panasonic UB9000, the UB820 will come in really handy. But the UB9000, you know, will have a couple more extra options to allow more finesse and granularity in terms of selection of the peak brightness output of the HDR metadata. So I selected basic luminance projector for this particular scene, and you can see that without the HDR Optimiser engaged, the spotlight is severely blown out, even though this disc only goes up to 1000 nits. But if I engage HDR Optimiser function, it will actually retain the shape of the spotlight and the glow around it, giving you more of a realism that gets you into the movie. Now, obviously, if you set the HDR display type to be equal to the nit level of the source disk, then the HDR Optimiser function will not apply. There won't be any tone mapping done. For example, if I select OLED or middle or high luminance LCD, the output will be 1000 nit, and on a 1000 nit disk such as The Greatest Showman, as you toggle between HDR Optimiser on and off, you won't be able to see a difference because the tone mapping is not being applied. There's just no difference between the source content and the required HDR metadata output. So in a nutshell, I really do think that the HDR Optimiser function is a fantastic feature that makes the Panasonic UB9000 and its step-down siblings a top choice for those of you who really want to enjoy 4K Blu-ray disc to its maximum capability. The way I try to explain it is this. I'm going to use an analogy. So it is basically just like you have a really big piece of Wagyu beef, you know, those from Japan, not from Yorkshire or something. So a really big piece of succulent Wagyu beef, maybe 1 kilogram. But depending on your appetite, whether you're that bloke from Man vs. Food, I've hit the wall. I've hit the wall. Or maybe you're Gwyneth Paltrow. What the Panasonic UB9000 will be doing is to actually cut up this Wagyu beef to smaller, more digestible chunks for you to be processed. And it doesn't mean that you cannot actually add your own seasoning. So it doesn't actually override the display tone mapping on any television. It just makes it more digestible, more easily processed for the display. And I think that it is an excellent addition to any home theater setup. But displays that will benefit most from the HDR Optimiser function on the Panasonic UB9000 will be projectors, will be televisions that don't really adapt between 1000 nit and 4000 nit metadata, will be, low luminance LED LCDs. I think the benefits are less obvious on high luminance LED LCD because less tone mapping is required, and all the HDR Optimiser function is doing is basically performing a large chunk of the tone mapping. So I would be interested to see if I even manage to get the Samsung Q90R or Q950R in. I'll be interested to see what this can do to improve the picture quality, whether there will be any improvement, or indeed, let's say, if I actually manage to test it on the ZD9 or ZF9, then I will be able to see how much of improvement we can actually see on these really high luminance LED LCDs. I suspect not very much, but I will be interested to investigate anyway. But in the meantime, I think this feature is a killer feature for Panasonic. No other 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray players on the market have this feature. So despite some other minor gripes about this player, I do have gripes about everything, so it's not a slight against this player. But it is probably the best player that you can buy if you really prioritize 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray playback. If you found this video useful, please click the like button and subscribe to the HDTV Test YouTube channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.